بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Moving on after covering the legacy of the Mukhtasar in our previous video, today we cover these worksheets which we have prepared for students to help them in understanding and studying the Mukhtasar. Now these are crucial because at this level, a student will begin to access commentaries. A student will begin to access footnotes. Perhaps he's already started in Nur al-Idah and now he will pick up on the commentaries he's referring to or the footnotes which he is referring to. And the issue comes along where a student starts accessing a commentary or a footnote and there's a lot of information. Because commentaries and footnotes, generally speaking, they're meant to provide everything. And they try to explain a lot of information and everything they possibly can. And as a result of that, the student is overloaded with information. And at times, he's not able to differentiate between what is crucial to his level versus what is not crucial at that level for himself. Number one. Number two, because there is a lot of information, at times, the authors of the commentaries and the footnotes, they will refer to concepts covered in other sciences. And they will import those concepts into the discussion on fiqh. And because the student isn't able to understand that this concept which the author is mentioning right now actually belongs, for instance, to usul al-fiqh, or it actually belongs, for instance, to al-lugha, or it actually belongs, for instance, to the science of i'rab. He will write down these points, even though in so as much as his understanding of fiqh, those points are not that crucial. Yes, there are certain points which fiqh is suspended upon, certain concepts in usul al-fiqh, which are important for a student to cover at this level. That 100% the student should note down. But there will also be other points, lughawi benefits, for instance, or secondary benefits, which are not crucial for the student to understand at this level. But because the student isn't aware of this, he summarizes everything he can, and he tries to retain everything he can, even though it would be better in his instance to work smarter and not harder. So the purpose behind these worksheets is to guide a student in his understanding of the Mukhtasar, and to guide him as to how to use the hawāshi and the shuruh in a manner where it's mostly beneficial to him. It is of utmost benefit to him, as opposed to, for instance, spending his time on discussions and matters which might not be that relevant to his level at which he is studying the Mukhtasar. So in studying the Mukhtasar, we have two steps. Step number one is to access the matan, and step number two is to access the footnote or the commentary. And the reason we have the student do this is because we want the student to be able to break down texts by himself. Just by reading the matan, he should not feel dependent on always having to access a commentary. Rather, he himself should be able to understand a degree of the matan just by reading it. And that, over here in our worksheets, this is what the first step and the second step refer back to. Number one, the role in the larger chapter and discussion at hand. And number two, Al-Quduri's text plus the perception of the ruling. Again, these two are technically the same level because you're gaining all this from referring to the matan. So in terms of the role this ruling plays in the larger chapter, generally speaking, Abu Lubaba will mention this for you in between brackets. And even if he doesn't mention it, if you read the matan itself 3-4 times, you'll be able to realize that, alright, Al-Quduri mentioned prior to this the fara'id al-wudu. After this, he's mentioning, for instance, the nawaqid of wudu, those matters which break or nullify the wudu. In the middle, he's mentioning the sunan of wudu. So you can write down over here, for instance, Al-Quduri has mentioned the fara'id, and he will come later mention the nawaqid. Right now, he is mentioning the sunan. And then you read through the text, and you find that he's mentioned 9 sunan. So you write down, he mentioned 9 sunnas of wudu. Now, at this level, you've understood the role this plays in the larger discussion. The second step is to read the text and to understand the ruling. Tasawwur al-mas'ala. This is extremely important because generally speaking, there is no benefit of knowing differences if your understanding of the mas'ala itself is not complete. The first step is to understand the ruling, and then once you've understood the ruling, you can move on to understanding differences within the school as well as the legal reasoning behind that ruling which you have understood in step number one. So now you take the ruling which you read from the matan and try to understand, using the matan alone, try to understand exactly what Al-Quduri is referring to. And over here, you simply write your general understanding of the ruling. You don't have to write, for instance, the detailed explanation of it, because at this point, you're only accessing the matan. Write down Quduri's matan and write down your general understanding of the ruling. If there's not enough space, by all means, you can write it in the first section as well. What is my general understanding of the ruling? Quduri is mentioning, for instance, that the siwak is from the sunnah of wudu. That means that, for instance, according to this text, siwak would not be a sunnah out of wudu. This is my understanding right now. Or for instance, he mentioned that takhleel, right, passing a wet hand, or wet fingers through the beard, and that part which extends from the beard, which flows from the beard, that is sunnah. So therefore it's not mustahab. I've understood this. It's very easy and very simple to understand. So you write that down into your notes. Now, after having a general perception of the ruling, as well as understanding where exactly does that ruling fall within the larger chapter, you move on to the second step. And by the way, in that first step where you're covering the matan, think to yourself, ask yourself questions. Why is he mentioning this over here? What could be the possible proof behind so and so? Maybe sometimes this might not make sense to you. Why is he mentioning, for instance, so and so action underneath the nawaqid, even though there's no khurujun najasa, there's no exiting of impurity? So why is he mentioning this action like sleep under the nawaqid? Or why is he specifying sleep to refer to sleeping when you were sitting, as opposed to refer to sleeping when you were laying down or resting against something, as opposed to sleeping when you were sitting or standing? So that certainly means that sleeping breaks wudu in certain scenarios as opposed to others. You don't have to access the hashiyah for this, because Quduri himself will say, for instance, when نَوْمُ مُضْطَجِعًا أَوْ مُتَّكِئًا أَوْ مُسْتَنِدًا إِلَى شَيْءٍ لَوْ أُزِيلَ عَنْهُ لَسَقَطَ عَنْهُ. Right? He will mention these clauses. So just by reading the matan, you can understand these clauses and you can write down these clauses for yourself. And in doing so, you'll have a good understanding of the text. Because if Quduri brought a clause, chances are the reason he brought the clause was to exclude something else. So you quickly write this down. For instance, he says, وَالْقَيْءُ إِذَا كَانَ مِلْءَ الْفَمِ. Like vomiting, when it's a mouthful, will break your wudu. Well, what if it's not a mouthful? Well, the fact that he's bringing this clause tells you that if it's not a mouthful, it wouldn't break your wudu. After this level, you move on to the second step, which is your refined understanding. Now remember, you already have a rough understanding of what you covered. But now by accessing the footnotes and by accessing the shuruh, oftentimes certain misconceptions you've had, or certain misreadings you've had, meaning when you misunderstood something from the text, that will be clarified within the hashiyah or within the commentary. So sometimes there's a clause you might have missed out. Or for instance, the clause that Quduri mentioned was not actually meant to exclude something, it was just mentioned randomly. Coincidentally, he mentioned this clause. Like for instance, in the example we covered in our previous video, regarding the sunnah of wudu, where Quduri specifically mentions إِذَا اسْتَيْقَظَ الْمُتَوَضِّئُ مِنْ مَنَامِ or مِنْ نَوْمِ. Now over there in the hashiyah, they'll tell you this clause is not integral, in the sense that if a person was not to wake up, but he was doing wudu, washing your hands until the wrist 3 times is still sunnah. And so based on this, the student can understand that this clause is not relevant. When reading the matan alone, he might think it's relevant. But later on, when covering the footnotes, he realized that his understanding was wrong, and now he can highlight this important point. Likewise, if there are any definitions, and this will often be marked by Abu Lubaba, because at this level you realize that a lot of the differences in fiqh, if you understand the definitions alone, you'll be able to tell why certain fuqaha differ. Because they define so and so concept differently. This will stem down, or this will extend down into the furu', the concept and the law that extend from this as well. So you write down the definitions if they're relevant to your discussion. Number 3, mention areas of agreement. This is extremely important. This is what we refer to as tahriru mahalli niza'. And when you're studying Nur al-Idah, when you're studying Quduri, this is part of tasawwur al-masala. Part of understanding the ruling is being able to determine where everyone agrees as opposed to the areas where everyone differs. Why? Because, for instance, you come across a mas'ala, a ruling, where Abu Hanifa differs with Abu Yusuf, and you simply write that down in your notes. But what you fail to realize is within that very ruling, if a certain clause is found, they have no difference whatsoever. But you've generalized their difference to include that scenario as well, which is incorrect. To give you an example, when it comes to doing wudu, the area in between the sideburns and the earlobe, is it necessary to wash that or not? Abu Hanifa and Muhammad differ with Abu Yusuf. They say it's necessary, he says it's not necessary. Now if you simply write this, there's an error. What's the error? When it comes to a child or a woman who don't have beards, over there everyone agrees you have to wash that area. So this is the area where everyone agrees. The first step in writing down the difference is to actually write down, with regards to someone who doesn't have a beard, such as a woman or a child, everyone agrees, including Abu Yusuf, that this section between what can be the sideburns and the earlobe needs to be washed. However, for someone who does have sideburns, this is the second step. For someone who does have sideburns, they differ. Abu Hanifa and Muhammad say this section needs to be washed, whereas Abu Yusuf said that it does not need to be washed. Now in this step, if you come across, for instance, a view that's attributed to the Zahir riwayah, make sure you write that down. That this view is the Zahir riwayah. Or a view attributed to Abu Hanifa as opposed to Abu Yusuf and Muhammad. Write down their views over here to get a complete understanding of the khilaf within the school. Again, at this level, you don't need to worry about khilaf outside of the school. Khilaf outside of the school will come later on. At this level, you simply need to worry about khilaf within the school. After this, after you mention the different opinions, in the text, if you find, for instance, that so-and-so opinion is the mufta bihi, so-and-so opinion is the mu'tamad, so-and-so opinion is asah or sahih, make sure you write that down. Because this is key to understanding the mu'tamad. Obviously, your teacher will clarify this for you, but you need to write it down to this level so you have a general understanding. And finally, if you want, you can make charts to help yourself summarize the discussion. Obviously, this can be delayed as well until after the last step, where you make charts to essentially summarize everything and to make it easier for yourself to retain the information you have covered. Now, just one important point at this level, if you come across proofs, legal proofs, you're not actually required to memorize or write down those legal proofs right now. It is sufficient for yourself to understand the mas'ala properly, understand the khilaf within the school, understand the correct view, and then step number 4, or the fourth thing you need to understand, which we'll mention right now, is the legal reasoning behind the views. You don't need to mention the legal proof as of this level. That will be taught later on in more detail. Right now, you can mention the legal reasoning behind the views if it's mentioned. If within the footnote or the commentary you're referring to, you come across the author saying, Abu Hanifa says so-and-so because of so-and-so reason. Now you can write that down. Abu Yusuf says so-and-so because of so-and-so reason. Now you can write that down. For instance, within this mas'ala, the reason Abu Hanifa and Muhammad say that you'd have to wash the area between the sideburns and the ear is because they say it falls under the wajh. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to wash the wajh. فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. So therefore you'd have to wash this as well. And the proof for this is the fact that if a person doesn't have sideburns, he'd have to wash this. What is Abu Yusuf's legal reasoning? Perhaps you might not find it in the hashiyah. Perhaps you might not find it in the commentary, which is fine. You don't have to write it down. Write down the legal reasoning which is in front of you. You don't have to go searching for legal reasonings. If your teacher mentions them to you, amazing. You can write them down and it will help you, or it will enhance your understanding of the mas'ala. Now when you're looking for legal reasonings, at time you might come across qawaid fiqhiyya and dawabit fiqhiyya. What's the difference? Generally speaking, the mutaakhirun say that qawaid fiqhiyya are applicable across all chapters of fiqh. Not just tahara, not just salah, not just zakah. It's applicable across all chapters of fiqh. Whereas dawabit fiqhiyya are applicable only within, or they're only relevant to one chapter of fiqh. They make this differentiation, but the two are used interchangeably, which is not an issue. You can keep the differentiation when you write down within your notes that, for instance, so-and-so mas'ala Abu Hanifa says this because of this qaida. Now over here, the qaida is serving as the legal reasoning, so write this down. If it's mentioned within the hawāshi or the commentaries you were referring to, Abu Yusuf says this because of so-and-so dabita, and you write this down. At this level, prior to attending class, you've accessed the commentary, you've accessed the footnote, and you have a good general understanding of the discussion. Now when you attend class, any questions you had, any misconceptions you had, any areas in your understanding that were left incomplete, you'll be able to completely understand them. And likewise, at times there will be certain footnotes you might not have understood prior to the lesson, but after attending the lesson, those footnotes will now make more sense. So you can add them back into your worksheet over here, and with this you'll have a good understanding of the Mukhtasar. By the time you finish this, bi'idhnillah, you begin with these taking notes, then attending class, and then reviewing your notes. By this time, when you cover all this, the information will be well retained within your mind. And if you review it every week or every month, you review what you covered in the month, by the time you finish the ibadat section in the Mukhtasar, you will understand ibadat amazingly. And you will have made a foundation for yourself to now build upon in later books that you will cover. Now, one important point I shall mention over here as well is that every chapter is different. There are certain chapters the student is more familiar with. For instance, ibadat you've already covered in Nur al-Idah. So because you're more familiar with this chapter, it makes sense for you, for instance, to look for legal reasonings or to look for proofs at certain times. But when it comes to other chapters, the chapter of nikah, the chapter of mu'amalat, over there, the first step, once again, is tasawwur al-mas'ala. Just worry about understanding the mas'ala, understanding what stems from the mas'ala, the differences that stem from it, as well as any different views which might be found within the school. That's the first step. And again, this differs from chapter to chapter and teacher to teacher. But as always, we would encourage students to refer to footnotes, to refer to the hawāshi. And at this level, if you have been reading and you've been studying hard and you've studied your Arabic, it should be simple for you to access hawāshi, and you won't understand everything, which is fine. Keep this in mind, you will not understand everything, and that's completely fine. Write them to understand, try your best to understand the text, and then come to class And if you have questions, feel free to ask. And with this, we have covered our worksheet. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.